pleased to stand here in front of you all and welcome you to the first Anisfield-Wolf author event of Cleveland Book Week 2022. You can go ahead and give it a round of applause. I'm Tara Pringle Jefferson. I am the Digital Communications Manager of the Book Prize. The Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards have honored the best writers tackling race and diversity for the past 87 years. Karen Long, manager of the Book Awards, who could not be here today because she's picking up another author for their event a little bit later. Karen has often remarked that it is incredibly prescient that Edith Anisfield-Wolf had the notion to fund these awards in 1935, and that her belief that literature can enhance justice is on point nearly 90 years later. This year, we're thrilled to be able to celebrate these authors in person with each of you, and we're especially excited to be able to kick off this year's author events with Donika Kelly, this year's winner for poetry. Her award-winning poetry collection, The Renunciations, was cited by juror Rita Dove as, quote, poetry of the highest order. Joyce Carol Oates, another Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards juror, observed that Renunciations is a delicately rendered, toughly honest, courageous book. I'm excited to hear from Donika today. To keep the show moving, now I'd like to introduce Daniel Hamilton of the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland.
Hello, welcome to the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland, one of the oldest continually operating LGBT centers in the United States. We have been serving and representing Northeast Ohio since 1975 through support, advocacy, education, and celebration. Our programs offerings serve LGBTQ individuals across the lifespan, from youth in our QU program to seniors through our SAGE program, and everyone in between. We advocate through a robust community training program, and we celebrate the community all year, but especially with our culminating event, Pride in the Clee, and our recently launched Pride Ride, which will be happening this October. Please check out the center and all the ways to get involved down at our front desk or on our website, lgbtcleveland.org. And we are so honored to be hosting the Cleveland Book Week and the Anisfield Book Awards presented by the Cleveland Foundation, and honoring Donika Kelly for the Renunciations and the 2022 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award winner for poetry. Lots of words. And we are also honored to be hosting all of you. So thank you very much.
All right, so now we are getting into the meat of our program. Just a little bit about Donika before I bring her up. In addition to winning this year's Anisfield-Wolf Poetry Prize, Kelly's poetry has been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Publishing Triangle Awards, the Lambda Literary Awards, and longlisted for the National Book Award. She earned an MFA from the University of Texas at Austin and a PhD in English from Vanderbilt. Her poems have been published in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the Paris Review, and the Paris Review. Donika will be in conversation with Dr. Taj Hussain, co-owner and clinical director of Kindred Harbor Behavioral Health, a practice that specializes in trauma-informed and LGBTQ+ affirming counseling. Together, they will discuss Kelly's experience writing her award-winning collection as she followed her own therapeutic path recovering from trauma. For those of you in the audience who may need space to reflect either during or after our conversation, we have space out on the terrace right behind you through that door. And as you're listening to the conversation, you're listening to the reading, if there's any questions that come up, you should have received index cards when you checked in, and you can write your questions anonymously, and we will come around and collect those in the basket so that you can, right there, so that you can ask your questions, and then Dr. Taj will moderate. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I hope you are too. Please welcome Donika Kelly and Dr. Taj Hussain to the mic.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here and to see your faces and to get to share this space with you. It feels like a number of dreams, but I love to be at an LGBT center. That feels right, it feels good. And I'm so grateful to be reading as a part of Cleveland Book Week and as a recipient of the Anisfield-Wolf Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards. Again, so many words. So I'm going to read from the Renunciations. The book, the collection does deal with investigations of the way the speaker's experience of childhood sexual abuse sort of sits at the center of her life. I will not be reading those poems today. It's a beautiful day outside. I don't want to be sad. I don't want y'all to be sad. But if you would like to experience some exquisite sadness, you could get the book. The poems are in there. It's just, the poems are good, but it's a bit much for 4 o'clock. So I'm going to read for about, I'm just setting my timer. I'm going to read for about 15 minutes. I believe I have chosen 10 poems. I might read a new poem if there's time, so we'll see. So I'm just going to read about getting divorced. It's not funny. That's the less sad track in the book. It really does sort of throw things into perspective. All right. So thank you all again for your good attention. I'm starting my timer right now. I'm going to talk a little bit of mess about hiking here in a minute. So there's a sequence in the book titled Dear, and then there's an M dash after it, sort of like the salutation to a letter. So, and so I'm going to read several of those today. Dear, we come from abundance, each season bowed with rain. But here is the earth, eager to flame, the air like salt, thirsty even for the water we carry in our skin. New wanderers in this land, we do not know how to wait for water, have never waited so long for rain that every tree died, left to stand tender. For now, I watch the shoulder burn, drive through the smoke that blots the mountains and holds the old yoke of sun. I know nothing of fire, its reach, its spread, know only that every body makes its own ash, manages its own diminishing. So this next poem takes up Greek, this trope, I feel like that's not quite the right word, a device, a defense mechanism that I observed in Greek mythology, where there would be a major god chasing a minor, like a river nymph, and then the river nymph's father would change the river nymph into a tree. Or reeds. They were we don't know what to do, because clearly this god is not getting the message. A tree? That felt wild to me. I was like, that's a strategy. So this is bedtime story for the bruised hearted. The trees were all women once, fleeing a god wedded with lust, until their fathers changed them, bound their bodies in bark, and still the god took a branch to crown his own head, the reeds to hold his breath. How like them, our fathers, those small gods who unearthed their children with rage, who scored the bark and bent the branch to bind their bodies with our own. Tonight, my love, we are free of men, of gods, and I am a river against you, drawn to current and eddy, ready to make, to be unmade. So there are a number of poems in this book that deal with hiking. And my ex-wife really liked to hike. I don't like hiking. So the things we do for love. And I feel like that was one of the things I was working through. It was we were just outside so much. I do like to be outside. I just like to sit and look. I don't want to walk up a hill and look. So this is Ars Empathica, Muir Woods National Monument. We lived in the imperative, walk through the tree, spin in the light, take dominion over one another. But about the tree, no euphemism there. A tree fell, a man with metal teeth ate the bark, the heartwood, the bark. We were like that then, eating and eaten, sawing and sawn. I mean, of course, our bodies, but also how we mounted together the hill. Be dizzy, said the sun. Be dizzy, said the blood. Be dizzy, said the heart and lungs and vessels between. How I cried at the summit. You blocked the sun and, somewhere, the ocean. what sweet anchor your eyes made. So the thing about hiking, I need to say this, it's just like, I'm an external processor. So it's like you hike all the way up to see the ocean, but then someone stands in front of you blocking the tiny, it's fine. I was like, we could just go to the beach. I was like, why would we? It's okay. All right. So this is in the chapel of St. Mary's. I can't tell you what happened there, why I entered the sanctuary a non-believer, only that I have been thinking about worship, the altar of the body, and supplication for some time. My thoughts turn, as they often do in this season of absence, to my wife and how tired a God can get when called, and too often for little reason but loneliness. Of course, I don't mean God here, but rather the woman I love, who alters the orbit of my life, pulls me with the density of light toward her, the draw thinner when she is farther away, as she is now. I try to find comfort in the inevitability of science when what I lack is faith. The sanctuary, the stained glass, 4 girls saturating it with soft chatter, small pots of stargazer lilies, a lace ribbon for each pew. This place is full of faith in the unknown, and I don't know how to believe in what I cannot see. Tonight, I will drive through the foothills and into the valley. I will try to make a little practice to trust you are with me, even though you are somewhere else. So this next poem is about being at a skating rink. Nashville has had, I don't know if it still does because I haven't lived there for a while now, but had a really great skating rink. And I would go sometimes with my friends on like Saturday night. Anyway, so I like this poem because it reminds me of being at the skating rink. Citing Virtue, Rivergate Skate Center, Nashville, Tennessee. The man in orbit blooms a heart on his back. The heart blooms wings of water, and in me rises not mercy, but a sense of order. I've drifted, loosed from the one who bound me, a planet with no anchoring star, and I know this man is neither God nor sidereal body, but neither is he a woman with an alchemical heart. His skin, his beard, his full breast enrapture me, draw my gaze from every other whirling body. I've drifted, and I know the man in orbit is not a man in orbit, but one in revolution, where revolution means change or a way of moving, where muscle ripples to water, moves from a state of gold to one of lead. Okay, so this next poem, I don't know if y'all are sort of tracking this. Things have starting to go downhill a little bit. So this next poem does deal with suicidality, but I say that just to let, I'm okay, my speaker's okay, it's just a low moment. And this is called Hymn. Dear river, dear creek, dear dammed tributaries, dear fuse, dear dynamite and wet match, amen. The water don't love me, and she don't love me, and maybe I'm drowning from the inside. Who put the river in my arms, said, don't let the water? Maybe the knife got a hard kiss and a sweet bite. Maybe the knife only metal and wood and a bit of brass, but maybe it know how to love the inside of me. Maybe I don't believe in meaning and God and plans and paths. And the closer I am to my animal self, the more human I am, the more I let myself break like a wave, ocean in my arm, stone in my arm, iron and wood and brass in my arm. So the next poem is about my buds. Have y'all ever had like a devastating tarot reading? I love how many people nod. Y'all are just like, yes. Have you ever had a devastating tarot reading in front of a group of your friends? Because that's fun. That's a good time. So this is called Citing Tarot, Pflugerville, Texas. And Pflugerville is a suburb of Austin. Okay. I learned how to hug here, how to draw a boundary and hold here against the gale force of my mother's late night rage and sob, learned too what it meant to be chosen, to choose, brought myself back to the receiving line, my chest cracked into 2 wet pieces after a fall so lonesome I wasn't sure I'd survive, and met the arms practiced in mending. I asked Jenny to read my cards. Sid and Shannon on the couch behind me, Amber and Joe in the kitchen, Nat in from Berkeley, the kids running around, Carlicia, I'm sure, at my right hand. Jenny spread the Celtic cross, gestured as she does, which is to say grandly, at my present, at the problem we all knew. The past, the conscious and unconscious, waited for the cards to name what we could all see there at the position of hopes and fears. 3 swords and 1 heart. How rude, I thought. Do y'all see this shit? I said aloud, the room gone quiet. A relief not to have to say what I had known in the room where I had learned the kind of love possible between friends, now family, the kindness possible between partners, grateful for the rough blow finally landed and the net to catch me. Dear. Sounds fun out there. Dear. Question. How do we process being overcome when we know the water is rising, rising because the sea ice is melting, melting because the animal we are shortens everything we touch into brief and useful pieces? Question. Can we call our marriage done, soon overcome, soon underwater, a city inhabited by whatever the sea brings to it? Question. How do you drown a city? Throw into the ocean every suffocation, the folded clothes, the lemon tree, a wife, anything that will sink as a stone. Dear one, is it too soon to call? I cannot swim and I will not drown. Okay. So this next poem is a hiking poem. Why do people like to hike? Okay, so on this one, I went with one of my grandpa's good friends. His name's Steve, and Steve is like a Ned Flanders, Ted Lasso kind of person, you know? Which is a lot. And Steve kept saying, we're almost there, we're almost there. And we were not. We absolutely were, like at no point were we almost there. But that was fun. So this is called Sighting Almost, Vernal Fall, Yosemite National Park. Never mind the 600 stairs carved in granite, or my guide, a man with a mustache and no concept of almost, or my moaned, why are we going up this hill at every hill, or his response that what comes up must go down, or the somewhere we've almost reached. Mind instead the 3 friends who breached the safety rail for a picture on the rocks and were swept over the falls by a river gorged with the melting snowpack. How they must have held each other in their descent before the Merced broke them apart. That was some time ago. An old man hiking with his son-in-law flatters me. You were only pretending to be tired to make us feel better. That wasn't true. The truth. I have come here to learn how not to kill myself. My guide takes my picture many times as we ascend. He captures Half Dome, El Capitan, Nevada Fall, and me, nearly upright, a silhouette before the sun. Okay. A dead thing that, in dying, feeds the living. I've been thinking about the anatomy of the egg, about the 2 interior membranes, the yolk held in place by the chalazi, gases moving through the semi-permeable shell. A curious phrase, the anatomy of the egg, as if an egg were a body, which it is, as if the egg could be broken, then mended, which, depending on your faith, broken, yes, but mended? Well, best to start again with a new body, voided from a warmer one, brooded and turned. Better to begin as if some small-handed animal hadn't knocked you against a rock, licked clean the rich yolk, and left the albumin to dry in the sun. As if a hinged jaw hadn't swallowed you whole. What I wanted, a practice that reassured that what was cracked could be mended or at least suspended so that it could not spread. But now I wonder, better to be the egg or scaled mandible, the small hand or the flies, bottle black and green, spilling their bile onto whatever's left, sweeping the interior, drinking it clean. I think something might have grown there, though I know it was never meant to be eaten. It was always meant to spoil. So the last poem I'll read from the book is The Moon Rose Over the Bay. I had a lot of feelings. And I really like this title, so there are actually 2 poems titled, just like out in the world titled The Moon Rose Over the Bay. I had a lot of feelings because I felt like it was too good to use only one time. And also I'm going to read it again because I really like it. So, The Moon Rose Over the Bay, I had a lot of feelings. The home I've been making inside myself started with a raising, a brush clearing, the thorn and nettle, the blackberry bush falling under the bush hog. Then I rested, a cycle fallow, said winter, said the ground is too cold to break pony, said I almost set fire to it all, lit a match, watched it ghost in the wind. Came the thaw, came the melting snowpack, the flooded river, new groundwater, the well risen. I stood in the mud field and called it a pasture, stood with a needle in my mouth and called it a song. Everything rushed past my small ears, whir in the leaves, whir in the wing and the wood. About time to get a hammer, I thought. About time to get a nail and saw. So I want to read a new poem, because I feel like, you know, that speaker's fine, but I have new love poems, so. So this one's for my sweetie. It was a birthday. I was like, I'm gonna write her a poem. She doesn't mind. But I definitely was like, I made this, and she was like, thank you. All right. So this is titled, and this is the last one I'll read, and thank you for your attention. This is titled, What is the Measure? I catalog what I cannot capture. The sun, its ragged stumble into rock face, the precise elevation of this plateau or the next, the sea, of course, against which everything is measured. My tools are insufficient, inexact. For instance, there is no way to measure the peak against the distance from the tip of one ring finger to the other, no matter my arm's position, outstretched, limp, akimbo. For instance, there is no way to weigh the earth pushed out of earth against the gravity of my body, its bones, its sacks, its meat and animating light. I submit. I do not constitute the mountain. This in spite of the palette of old quilts and newly fallen maple leaves I've made at its immeasurable base. I submit. I do not constitute the field, although I have harrowed its length, its width, with my long feet, my slow step. Never mind I hear what scurries or scatters, what burrows or bounds. Never mind I raise my hand to hover the bent grass, the echinacea's bald crowns, all of which withers or writhes, all of which is new or nearly the same before my foot's next fall. I submit. As with the mountain, the field. As with the field, you. Ineluctable as a season, sun ragging the rock face, your arm nearly as long as mine, your palm wider, your mouth a beginning, your eyes, of course, that against which everything else is measured. You harrow and the summit writhes, your broad foot falls and the field akimbo gives up its gravity, lets loose its bodies, its bones, thrums an animating light. Thank y'all.
So we're waiting for the questions, correct? Or for people to pass their questions around?
Or I think we chat for a minute,
Oh, okay.
and then we'll let them,
Okay,
and
so-
we'll let people gather their questions and,
Got it.
yeah.
So I actually do get to use these.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much for that. I really, really enjoyed reading your book.
Oh, thank
I
you.
told you, I used an expletive to describe it earlier. It was when I told you how awesome it was. I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to come here and just talk to you. And like I was told, we're just going to talk and have a conversation about about what's going on. So some of the questions that I thought of that maybe we could think about was your opinion or how you look at poetry or writing or the transformative or healing power of writing for you.
Yeah. For me, writing is such an important part of how I understand myself as a person in the world. It's become sort of a grounding aspect of my identity. And in writing the poems for this book, it was a lot. The poems were coming. So there, as I mentioned earlier, there are these poems that, there are these 2 sections in the book that deal with childhood sexual abuse. And those poems just started coming. And I was like, oh no. I was like, I don't want to write these poems. This is terrible. And because the poems were coming, I knew I needed more support than I had. So I started with the Courage to Heal workbook, or the Courage to Heal, and then also paired that with the workbook, which was really helpful. But at the time I was adjuncting in California, and so did not have access to a therapist, which had been like the first time in a really long time that I had not had access to a therapist, because I've been in therapy, except for that 1 year for like 20 years. So fortunately, I got a new job. I was able to go to therapy. I was going once a week while I was writing this book. Sometimes twice a week, and for different reasons, for like not just because of that, but I needed that support where I was like externalizing in therapy some of the stuff that was coming up so that I would have enough distance when I was writing the poems. And so the poems themselves tend not to be, or at least I don't understand them as just recounting the events of having been abused, but rather the writing allowed me to investigate how I was letting that story about myself, the story I was telling myself about having been abused and how that shaped who I was, like how I was letting that sit at the center of myself. The writing allowed me to externalize that and push against that narrative. One of the things I love about poetry is like it really, at least like the lyric, really does resist narrative, and I find that really helpful for investigating and disrupting.
Okay. Well, I guess just going back, because you mentioned like what I love about poetry, one element of it. So what sparked your interest in poetry initially?
Oh, I don't know. I was young and I had a lot of feelings. I think that's what happened. And I still feel really confused. It's like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, this is what I do? This is the genre that I write in? This is the one that makes sense? Because in some ways I do, like poems are hard. Like I have to, both in the writing but also reading sometimes, like I have to be in my most attentive space to show up with the work and for the work. And I don't always think about myself as like a very attentive person, so it's like it feels a little bit counter inside, but I think poetry asks me to attend to the world that I'm a part of and to be present and be in my body, and I feel really grateful for that because I'm always looking for or sparked by material of just like walking around and being with my folks and hanging out with my old dog, you know, and also always having a lot of feelings.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I told you I really asked you this question in the other room and wanted to bring it up again. So like when I think about writing, putting to paper some of the darker moments of your life, things that you, and struggles and things that you had to thrive from and survive from, and just the idea of like laying yourself bare and just making it really, just putting it out there for people to consume. And how do you cope with that? How do you decide what to share and how to share it?
I'm going to say something slightly different, or maybe very different from what I said when we were talking earlier. So another thing that I'll actually tie this back to your other question. One of the things that I really like about poetry is the artifice. I like all the different things that one can become absorbed in, like, oh, what is the length of the line? Where am I turning the line? What is the shape? What is this voice doing? What point of view am I using? And that creates distance between, and that distance is really productive for me, that distance between the experience and then like the work that it takes to transform an experience into art, as opposed to a more simple recounting. Like I take comfort in the artifice. It doesn't, so then I don't feel as bare.
Yes.
But also, I do like thinking about the speaker. And I used to not think about the speaker as a figure that was different from me. But what I was talking with Amy Nezukuvatatiel. I was visiting her class. She's a wonderful poet. I was visiting one of her classes, and she asked me who the speaker was in my first book, and I was like, it's me. And she was like, no. And I was like, wait, is it me? And so like just that moment sort of created a little bit of room for me to start thinking about the speaker as a construction that was a little bit different from me. And that gave me room to begin to think about what I was asking this character to go through. Like, would I want this character to have to say or experience everything that I experience? Like, so there are sections in the sections of the book that deal with the abuse. There are these bracketed spaces. There are these like elisions. Things are blacked out. And in some ways, I understand that as a strategy of like relief for my speaker to not have to say some things. Like I know what's in the brackets. Like when I read it, I'm like, I know what goes in there, but I don't have to say it. My speaker doesn't have to say it. The reader doesn't have to read it. And so there's a way that as I became more tender with myself through the writing of the poems, or before writing the poems, I was able to extend that tenderness to my speaker, and I think ultimately to the reader. So I don't feel as bare. I feel like sort of more alongside, sort of like trying to think about what is this thing that I'm asking people to read, you know, which is hard. Like it's, there's a part, the section that's titled Now Then. It's like I don't read from that part because I don't want to do that. But it felt important. The writing felt important, and also I think the poems are good. So
okay, yeah, that helps, right? So when I say the term post-traumatic growth, what does that mean for you?
Oh.
Or are you familiar with the term?
No.
Okay, let's start there.
Yeah.
So it's the idea of growth after traumatic experience, like the resilience that can come from that, the lessons you can learn, like that it can engender growth, actually. And so it's kind of big in the trauma space. Is the idea of like of how you can grow, be different, learn from these experiences. And so now that you know what it means, kind of like what would that mean for you?
Well, what I thought of was how in the writing of these poems, which was over the course of a few years, this was related also to like I have been teaching, to the fact that I have been teaching in gender studies, and so we were reading Audre Lorde, we were reading Adrienne Rich. I came to understand something about the dynamic in my family, and this sort of was replicated in my marriage at the time, where someone else who was not, no one in my family is really at the center of their own lives, except maybe my dad, because he's at the center of everyone's life, or he would like to be. But I think I became used to not being at the center of my own life, or not being able to prioritize what I needed, and in sort of pushing against the story that I had told myself about having been abused, which in some ways was like putting my dad at the center of my life. I was able to get closer to the center. And so the writing itself and the investigation, but also the work that I was doing teaching in gender studies, and then also all of the therapy that I've been in for almost 20 years now, has like been really helpful to sort of clarify like what is the nature of the relationships that I would like to be in, like how would I like to relate to other people. And I'm much more interested in being alongside instead of what I think of as like a patriarchal structure of dominion, right? One person over another, people over animals, people over the earth. You know, it's like, what happens if we just understand ourselves as being alongside? And that concept has just been really grounding for me.
Let's see here. So I guess along the lines of the transformative and healing power of writing, post-traumatic growth, just curious about how you've already shared that you have been in therapy for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And so I guess another thing I was wondering was like other ways that you foster your own resilience and how that has changed over the years, if it's changed for you.
That's an interesting question. I think what has happened for me has been an increased interest in being vulnerable and moving towards spaces where that feels possible, and relationships where that feels possible, and recognizing what those relationships look like, and also understanding, because this is the Melissa Phoebos, my wife, the person I'm married to now, is really wonderful. There's a lot of room in our relationship to just be weird. Like, we're very strange together. And like with COVID especially, like we were in the house together in Iowa alone for like 2 years. It got very strange in there. And I was like, this is great. We can just decide to do whatever makes sense for us in this space right now, because there's no script that we have to follow, you know? And I think moving into like friendships, moving closer to friendships and relationships where there aren't rules necessarily, but just like we're taking care of each other, we're showing up for each other, we're celebrating each other, expanding what success looks like. Like, my friends do well, that means I'm doing well too. I'm trying to get my students to understand this one is like pretty tricky, because they're like, I need to win. And I'm like, if it's just you, that's lonely, and that puts a lot of pressure on like one person. But if you have a group and people in your group are doing things, there's lots of ways to celebrate in there. So just like, I've been working on cultivating more room for celebration. But that feels a little bit counter to how I grew up, or a lot counter to how I grew up. So that one's still pretty new, but it feels good. Yeah.
Let's see here.
And I think we might almost be ready.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're doing great.
I did it.
You're
Okay,
doing a great
yes,
job.
no.
Yeah.
I suppose, I guess the last question I have for you is if you have any like wisdom or for survivors. I like to call them thrivers, but you know, but for people that.
Yeah. I can't figure out what word makes the most sense for me. I don't know. I mean, I think we're still here, you know, and that counts for more than a little bit, yeah. And I also think, like, maybe this goes back to your earlier question about writing. One of the things that has been really clear for me is that I can write anything that I want to write, and I don't have to share any of it. And I can also, in the writing of something that's really difficult, that sort of brings up or activates those feelings and memories, like, I can just stop. Like, I don't have to keep going to like be tough and like make myself have this experience. I can just be like, whoa, this is too much. So we're just gonna pause, maybe go for a walk, watch the Golden Girls, I don't know, take a little nap. That in some ways, like, in the work and in the writing, I've just taken some of that pressure off to have to like push through. And also, I don't have to share everything. There are lots of things that I've written that I don't plan on sharing that are about these experiences. And that there's like, that's okay. That we don't have to share everything with folks. So those are the things that I think. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Serious question. I wonder what the questions are going to be. No.
You want to pick one and hand it to me?
No, I'm going to try. I was going to just trust you to do it.
Oh.
That's, yeah. Here,
That makes it more interesting.
Yeah, why don't you take those?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this one says, what poets do you feel your book is in conversation with? Who should we be reading right now?
Oh. Well, I think that's a great question. So when I was approaching how I wanted to write during the period that I was writing these poems, I wanted to be a clearer poet and to be a more vulnerable poet. And so there were 3 poets that I like sort of had in mind. There are more, but there were 3 sort of big ones, and it was like Sharon Olds, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Lucille Clifton. And just like in some ways just sort of like coming into like being able to be clear and still have music and have some artifice. But Natasha Trethewey has always been just like a guiding star for my work. I was talking with a friend recently, and I was like, I never talk about like the first poets I read when I didn't know like who the poets were, and there wasn't someone who was like, these are the poets you need to read. And I remember really loving Maya Angelou. I read Alice Walker. I read Sandra Cisneros. Like those were poets who were really important to me because I could just enter into the work without needing the secret map or feeling that. Like I just felt welcomed in that way. And so those the other poets who I mentioned earlier also do that for me. And always Carl Phillips, even though his poems are not always open or easy to navigate. I think there's something in his work that I'm drawn to, just the density of it. I find exciting to navigate. And then most recently, I think the book, and I mean, I'm obviously not alone in this because this book won a ton of awards, but Diane Seuss's Frank. It's a big book. Like it has many pages, and it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite things that I've read in the last year. So, all right. So this question, what has it been like writing about divorce or about people in your life who center in your work? So that one's tricky. My ex-wife and I do not talk to each other, so I don't actually know her experience of this book. But when I was writing the poems and I was thinking about the poems that went into the book, I really wanted to focus on my experience in that relationship and not necessarily on her. Because like I don't have her side of things. Like I can understand, like there's a field of action, right? There are the things that happen, but I don't actually know like on the interior what was going on with her necessarily. But I was having a very intense experience, and that was what I really wanted to focus on. And this relates actually to the last poem that I read, which was for Melissa. And I've written her lots of love poems, and I'll be like, this poem is about you. And she often says to me, no, this poem is not about me. This poem is about you and how you feel about me. And I'm like, isn't that the same thing? And it's not the same. And so in some ways, like I'm trying to grapple with, like if I'm writing a poem to someone that I want them to like feel seen in, sort of thinking about like what is their relationship to being seen in a poem, how do they understand that, and trying to like integrate that in some way with like what's going on in the poem itself. And so like the speaker in that last poem was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I like to be next to you. You know, I like to be alongside. And so I'm trying to figure out more that dynamic, but I only have access to me, really. I can only write about myself and from my own perspective. I mean, I guess I could write about other things, but I'm interested in is myself and my thinking and where it comes from. And so that's what comes out in the work. Yeah.
All right.
What do you have over there?
Oh, I just turned this so I don't get them mixed up.
That's right. That's great.
Okay, so this one says, what advice did you get that meant a lot to you when you were just beginning as a writer that you could share with us?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very much, this is, so, how long ago has it been now? It's been like 7 years ago now. This is a roundabout answer. I'm so sorry, even before I get started. But I was in this drawing and painting class, and I like to draw, but at that time I was like, I'd never taken a class, and so I was in this class, and the instructor, Susan Moody, she would come around and she would point to people's papers, and she would point to just a small part, and she would say, "That's really nice. That line there is really, really beautiful." And she wouldn't say the whole thing was beautiful, because that was not true. Or she would be like, yeah, that's a great start. Just like, you might want to put down a little bit more color to help the light pop. And I would be like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, person who has been doing this for a long time. Thank you so much. But really, her coming around and pointing out the parts that were working were so helpful. I just took my first vocal lesson on Monday, this past Monday, and that was super scary. Because I like to sing, but I am not good at it. And I just like want to sing better. Like, not even in front of people, but just like better, you know, just like following Melissa around, just like singing at her. Again, making it weirder in the house, adding more texture to the house. And in that lesson, it was the same thing. When she heard something that she thought was really nice, she was like, this is nice. Right? Like, that part sounds good. And I was like, I will be back. Thank you. And so I think if you're early in the writing, new to the writing, whatever it is, but I also think this is true if we've been doing it for a while as well, looking for those places where it feels good, you know, and like writing more into that space instead of saying, oh no, this whole thing isn't working, so I don't know what I'm doing. Let me just stop, you know. It's like the practice is, it takes time to build up that skill set, but there's pleasure in the drafting and the practice and the making. I also really like to lower the stakes. So no poem has to be good. Nothing I write has to be good.
Just get out there.
I just like writing it. I enjoy writing. Now, what I share with other people, that's a different standard. But when I'm just drafting, it's just me on the couch at like 11 o'clock at night, leaned over like this. It's like, that doesn't have to be good. I just want to have some fun and engage with this thing that feels good to me. You know, it doesn't have to be art on that draft.
So you remove the judge and just write, just get it out. And it's interesting, I started singing lessons over the summer. My husband asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I was like, I love to sing in the shower, and I want singing lessons. So we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's good, but I like doing it.
I was mortified. At one point, like, she was like, sing me a song. I was like, I couldn't possibly. And she was just sitting. She was like, when you're ready, I'm ready. I was like singing. I was like, oh, this is so bad. Like, I curled over like a little cooked shrimp for a moment. And then she was like, but keep going, you're doing great. And I wasn't. But I felt like, I was like, okay, like she's here for whatever this nonsense is. And I actually really liked it. It felt really good, even though I was like mortified. It was like nice to be in my body in that way, I guess.
Something for yourself that you've have always wanted to try. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you have another one over
I
there?
do.
Yeah.
Are you all out over there? All right, so I have, as someone with an abundance of family trauma, may I ask, what was step one for you in terms of letting go?
Oh, letting go in what way? I don't want to put the person on blast. When I was in the 6th grade, so I was a crier. I was one of those kids who just cried and cried and cried. I think this is just my nature in some ways, like all the Cancer in my chart, you know, it's just like a lot of water. I'm not a Cancer, I'm Sagittarius, in case I feel like that was important for you to know. It doesn't matter. But I would cry and cry and cry. And eventually my teachers were like, you need help. And so I would go to see the school counselor. There was like a therapist who would come into, this was in 6th grade, so she would come, or 5th and 6th grade, she would come to the school every other week. I would get out of class, she would give me fruit snacks, she had a doll house, we played Candyland. It was the first time I played Candyland, which is a great game. I have very positive associations with this. But the first time I saw her, I absolutely just like started crying. I was actively like being abused at that time. And so I knew, I felt like I couldn't say anything. But I did enjoy my time with her, even though I felt really guarded. So when I was in college, sort of more away from my family, you know, and I lived with my folks for like the first year and a half and then of college, and then I moved into the dorms. It was like moving into the dorms and seeing the therapist on campus who at the time, I think this was before young people were like, I could go to therapy. So she was never busy. She was just like, she would just be sitting in her office and I would be like, hi, you have a minute? Like no appointment or anything. And I think it had to be that easy. But that's what helped, was just like realizing that there were other places I could go that felt safe, where I could talk about myself and not have to be about how that made somebody else feel. And then at one point, my parents said, why don't you talk to us about what's going on with you? We're your family. You can talk to us. And I was like, it's you. I was like, you are the thing I'm talking about in therapy. And they were like, oh. I don't know. But I think because they didn't make a big deal about me being in therapy in the 6th grade, I didn't feel a stigma about like going later. I was just like, great, I'll just do this because it helped before, and also there were fruit snacks. So.
Can I ask a question? Okay. So I read a little bit about you. I'm not familiar with your work. I read a little bit about you, and then came here, and even some of the questioning keeps coming back to the abuse and all this stuff. And then, and I know that you chose lighter things to read today, but all of that was, first of all, it was a feast of the English language.
Oh, thank you.
Oh my God, it's so good. But I never heard words of sort of anger and victimism, all that sort of thing that I kind of thought might work their way into this, because of some of the background I know. But what I find more interesting is that not one time since you started talking, after you finished reading the selected poems, have I ever heard any of those words or any of those feelings either. So is that a conscious choice? Do you think it's because of the therapy, or just think you... It's a real interesting dichotomy to me, because I keep thinking somewhere in there, and I haven't read the dark stuff, so I'm not sure. I mean, you can...
Well, I do think at this point, I mean, a lot of that, like I've just done a lot of work on that particular part of my history. So like the therapy for a really long time, it was like, let's be vulnerable. I was like, ooh. And then I did that, and it was like, okay, let's try to do this thing. And it's like, I felt like I was peeling away the layers, and then I got to the big boss. And then like, that's what the book, like I was like, oh no, I'm at the big boss. I would like to not do this. And in that space, like I was sort of working through those feelings of anger, but coming out on on another side of it, not the other side, because it circles back. It's like, it's a bit of a spiral, but it's not as hard as it used to be. I don't know. I mean, I feel really happy with my life. I feel really fortunate that I get to make art, that's like something that's central to what I do. I have cultivated a really loving community, and that's the space that I'm held in, and that's the space where I like to hang out. And I don't like to hang out thinking about, I don't know, like, and even then, like, sort of the anger, it's just complicated, you know? It's a bit of a messy scene. Like, one of the things that I was working through in the book is like, my dad is not a monster. My dad is a person who made choices. And I obviously disagree with many of those choices and continue to. He continues to be a terrible human being. But I don't engage with him.
I applaud you though, because it would be so easy to find that language, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's all for me. Everything that I've done is for me. Yeah, it's not for him, because I don't care about that dude. But but I do feel like the work that I've done has been, how can I be in my life and live in my life in a way that feels meaningful and thoughtful, and I'm relating to people in ways that are really tender. How can I just surround myself with people who I want to be tender with, you know? And that's a lot of selection. It's a lot of boundaries. But it has mostly worked. So, and somehow I'm here, and and I've gotten to talk with you and talk with y'all, and this has just been really, really, really wonderful. You know, so.
Yes. I think
that's our time.
Yeah, I think we're at time.
Thank you so much for that reading and this wonderful conversation, and thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who already have your copies of the Renunciations, you can join us out here in the atrium for a signing if you need to purchase one. We also have some books for purchase. I also want to make sure, before I let you all leave, I want to make sure that I thank the LGBT Center for allowing us to host in this beautiful space and being a partner for Cleveland Book Week. You can go to Anisfield-Wolf.org for more details of the remaining Cleveland Book Week events, and you can also go on our website tomorrow for the live stream of our award ceremony beginning at 6 p.m. So thank you all. Give us one more round of applause for this wonderful event. Everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day.